Jenny.
Hey, Meth!
I want to wish you a happy Catradora Day.
Happy Catradora Day, buddy!
I can't think... Okay, so there are gayer days in the calendar, but this is up there.
Why be hierarchical? That's not queer.
That's true.
We're bathing in the queer. It's a non-hegemonic, beautiful circle of gay gayness.
This is a beautiful, non-hegemonic circle of gay gayness. Celebrate your love of a blonde hero protagonist and her cat girlfriend.
Hallelujah!
Hallelujah. So we have a couple of things that we want to do before you go out and celebrate by saving the universe with some queer love. We want to bring up some things.
Yeah, first of all, we just want to say, hi, friends, we're back!
Hi, friends. We really missed you.
Yes, we're really happy to be back. We did not expect to be away so long, but we've been really busy with our time. We are back with our very exciting post-season 4 bonus episode. And this time, instead of it being our typical race roundtable, we are devoting this episode to a topic that is closer to our personal hearts. This one is about Israel and Palestine. And we will get slightly more into the weeds on that in a moment, but let's move on, Meph, and talk about our other major announcements. Then we'll get back into details on this episode. Does that sound good?
It sounds great. So we are so excited to announce we are back with season 5. We also have our original Heodora Dream Team cast back. That's right. Our original producer, Ashley, is now back with us, returning as our TikTok dream maker, while yours truly, Meph, is working as your editor and producer on season 5.
Dream team in the house!
Dream team in the house! And I would love to first extend my thank you to all of the generosity for all of you folks who have enabled me to start classes and go to school to actually learn how to be a podcast editor and producer. And first of all, thank you. And second of all, I'm asking you for more money.
Yeah, it's a great investment, folks, because Meph's skills have exploded. Wait until you hear today's episode. The sound quality is tight.
Yeah, it's pretty tight, but I still need a little bit more help to finish paying off my program. I came a little short this quarter, and I would love it if I could get a little bit more help from the community. You could help me out by donating to my GoFundMe. I can give you the link. The link will be in my show notes. It's also at bit.ly/audiometh.
And if you guys didn't know, mutual aid is hella queer.
Mutual aid is hella queer, so help out Force Captain Meph. Continue to make banger after banger, because season 5 is just banger after banger after banger after banger.
And you can help make it even better with your gay dollars.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Meph. Thank you for all your blood, sweat, and tears that have made Heodora the beautiful, wonderful project that it is. And we are so excited to have this dream team back together for season 5. So we are going to be back in late June with our regular season 5 coverage on the same 3-week schedule that we were on before. And it's going to be great. We're going to have wonderful guests. We're going to have great surprises. We're going to have more live watches and live chats like we've had before. It's all gonna be great. So speaking of our Patreon activities, we have a live watch coming up for all patrons to kick off Pride Month.
Oh my God. Jenny, please tell me more,
yes,
because I'm literally on the edge of my seat.
May 26th, which is a Sunday, at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, we'll be watching Princess Prom and Save the Cat. The gayest episodes that ever gayed gaily across Homoslavia gaily.
I want to move to Homoslavia. This sounds great.
And it's a special occasion because normally our live watches are for $5 and up patrons, but this one, in honor of Pride Month, in honor of us coming back from this hiatus, it's for everybody. Everybody who is any kind of patron at any level gets to join us. So please join us. It's the most beautiful time to join and be alive and be queer.
So for a measly $3, you can go to our Heodora Pride Party, which I feel like is the cheapest Pride Party I've ever been to.
Yeah, I can't think of anything cheaper than that. It'll be a grand old time.
It'll be a gay old time.
It definitely will. No lies detected.
No lies detected. So join us on May 26th.
Yes.
For our Pride Party. We're going to watch Princess Prom. We're going to watch Save the Cat. We're going to chat.
Super mucho gay screaming will be had.
So much gay screaming. We're going to have to move the microphone so far away.
Oh my gosh.
We're going to be like,
yes.
Ah!
Your ears will
screaming.
be jelly.
But we'll be gentle on you.
Yes, gentle jelly. All right, so now we can dig back into today. This is our final note before we move into today's actual episode. So this episode was actually recorded in February. So we have a couple of updates in the notes. Yes, so today's show notes are going to have a lot more links than the average episode because there is just so much information to be had. I want to draw your attention to two of those links specifically. One is for the documentary Israelism, which we discuss in the episode. This is a really fantastic documentary that I can't recommend enough. I think everyone should watch it, no matter whether you're Jewish or not, regardless of how educated you are. And up till now, it's only been available online for short bursts of time, and you have to catch it, while it's available. But starting in June, it's going to be available on streaming. So you'll be able to watch it on Apple TV or Amazon Prime. And so that's really awesome. They finally have streaming distribution. So huzzah, Israelism, watch it streaming, watch it online. You'll be able to watch it anywhere starting in June. So you'll be able to follow the link in the show notes for that. And the other link I want to draw your attention to specifically is regarding the campus protests. You might wonder, why did they not discuss the campus protests in this episode? And the answer is because they had not happened yet when we recorded this episode in February. So I'm putting in another link regarding that to another wonderful podcast called On the Nose. This is the podcast of the publication Jewish Currents, which is one of the oldest and most venerable lefty Jewish publications in the United States. They've been around forever. And they're fantastic. So their podcast has 2 episodes discussing, number 1, unpacking the campus anti-Semitism narrative, and number 2, Jewish organizing in the campus protests. And I can't recommend, again, these episodes enough. They're wonderful. They're insightful. They're incredibly well-spoken young people speaking for themselves from these campus protests. So I recommend those resources very much, and they are in the show notes. Meth, are we ready to dive in?
I think we're ready to dive in. We're so proud of this episode. It's from our hearts. We really want to share this with you.
Yes.
And
we know it's not for everyone. It's going to certainly ruffle some feathers. And you can't have hard conversations without ruffling feathers.
And it's a hard conversation to have. And we're both very honest about where we come from, who we are, where we are now.
If people want to talk about it with us more, of course, we would love that. And you know how to reach us for those conversations. Reach us, at our email, reach us on social media. You know how to reach us.
Yep, we are both always willing to have civil conversations.
Yes, where people don't call each other names and question each other's basic humanity. Conversations like that.
Yes. So we are very excited to present this episode. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next month. Happy Catradora Day.
Gay screaming!
Gay screaming! Ah! Hey, folks, and welcome back to Hey Adora, your queer shearer podcast. I am Force Captain Meth, they, them.
I am Princess Jenny, she, her. And we have a special guest with us today. Introduce yourself, special guest.
Hi, I'm Kaya Jackson. I use they, them pronouns. I'm an interdimensional justice advocate.
Oh, that's
nice.
Rad.
Welcome, interdimensional justice advocate Kaya.
I feel like that's definitely someone that we need in this day and age.
Amen to that.
So Kaya is here to talk about pretty important topic to both Jenny and my heart. We are taking this special episode of Heodora, a Queer Sheer podcast, to talk about Israel and Palestine and what it's like being anti-Zionist Jews and the struggle that, and just kind of our personal experiences with it, and, you know, the social justice struggle, and we're just going to talk.
Yes, and we are also going to talk about ways that we can relate these themes to themes on the show, but that is not the primary thing we're going to talk about. We're going to talk first about our experiences as young Jewish people coming into consciousness on these topics, our journeys towards anti-Zionism, because that is something we all share. And then we will, after all of that, talk about parallels that we have seen that are very pertinent on the show.
Yes, and we will also, in the show notes, Jenny has shared fantastic resources. We can reshare the resources that we have on how you can get involved as well. So
yes, and of course, I'm also going to share the links to some specific fact-based things that I will be saying. I will put citations for those in the show notes as well.
Yeah. So Jenny, do you want to get started?
Sure. So I'm going to start by giving Kaya's bio. Kaya is a healing-centered creator, space holder, story weaver, and activist. In late 2023, Kaya co-organized the 25-mile March for Palestine in Western Mass, which I was also privileged to be a part of. They also began directly organizing as a core team member with Jewish Voice for Peace of Western Mass at that time, and currently serve on multiple organizational teams, including the Ritual and Relational Health Team and Action Planning Team. They have previously served as a movement chaplain, offering emotional and spiritual support and uplifting practices of self-care and community care with activists through Faith Matters Network and beyond. A longtime co-creator and member of the collective leadership team of Survivor Theater Project, they practice a deep commitment to collective decision-making, feedback-seeking, and intersectional feminism. They also love facilitating workshops on disability justice, community care, and restorative practices. Kaya received a BA in Interdisciplinary Arts from Hampshire College, 5 College Love, give it up, and an MDiv from Earlham School of Religion, and a certificate from Prison Yoga Project. That's a great bio.
That is a great bio.
Thanks. I'm trying to live into it every day and figure out what the next sentence is going to be. I just don't know.
Yeah, you definitely are. Yeah, so we met through the 25-mile March for Palestine, and I'm so glad that we did. We did not meet when we were both 5 college students. I don't think we were 5 college students at the same time.
Not quite.
But we're very happy to have you today.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be here.
Yeah. What was your journey? And I mean, this is a huge question that we could spend hours talking about, each one of us, I'm sure. What was your journey towards awareness on the topic of Israel and Palestine? When did you first start to identify as either anti-Zionist or non-Zionist? What was that journey like for you?
So the first time that I think I ever heard about Palestine was at a documentary, below an art gallery in town when I was a teen. I just was connected with the arts community there and kind of stumbled into it and was curious what the documentary was really about, and walked away just feeling a sense of shock and despair. And I remember going, after the documentary, which had footage of checkpoints and the treatment of Palestinians, it was not the most graphic documentary one could show or find, but it communicated enough to me that I felt very impassioned. And so I went to social studies class the next day and was like, Mr. DeZetta, did you know about Israel-Palestine? And he was like, yeah, I know about Israel-Palestine. But it was mind-blowing to me at the time because it was something that nobody had talked about in any space that I was a part of. I grew up in a multi-faith and mixed family situation where my mom was Jewish, my father was not. I spent years going to the local Hillel Shabbat and also to Baha'i gatherings and also to Unitarian Universalist Church more when I was a teen. And so I had these different experiences that caused me to be aware of Israel and its connection perceived connection with Judaism, but it wasn't something that I was deeply invested in. And furthermore, because I had many siblings who didn't have the same mom as I did, who didn't identify as Jewish, it also, I think, from an early age, I kind of complicated my own sense of family and home. And so when I gradually learned more about the political situation and the colonial situation in the state of Israel, it felt pretty clear to me. Now, I had some twists and turns in my journey. One of them was that in my late 20s, I went on the birthright trip. And I think at the time, I was getting ready to go to divinity school at that time. And there was a part of me, I think that the Jewish kind of track that I had never followed to deepen my own sense of like cultural heritage and spiritual heritage. And I had a lot of questions as I was about to enter into a more Christ-centered religious institution. And so at that time, I chose to go on the birthright trip as a way to hold space for some of those questions. And I walked away feeling like I could see the clear ways that there was some brainwashing happening within that program. And it just felt like it kind of came to a head at the closing of the program, which was this like massive concert experience where I felt like it felt very nationalistic to me in a way that was so overt and
it's
unrelatable.
Ironic how birthright backfires a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Please continue. But yeah, I had a similar experience. Yeah.
And I remember that our tour guide, who had many great stories to tell, also said some really messed up things, specifically about the Bedouin community, which there was one activity where we ostensibly stayed with a Bedouin community, and I think it felt like a mock situation, like it didn't feel grounded in anything. Yeah, it didn't feel relationally grounded to me. It felt like it was set up kind of as a hotel for birthright trip participants to stay. But anyway, my tour guide specifically said that the Bedouins needed to catch up with the times and move to the city and stop living. He just went off on this, and there was so much silence ultimately around Gaza and Palestine as a whole throughout that trip, that it left me with a lot of questions. And at the same time, I would say I walked away feeling like the issues were more complicated than I had thought they were. And that sense of the complexity, that perceived complexity, led me to be more silent in the years directly following that trip. Because I think I did recognize around that time that I hadn't processed my own internalized anti-Semitism. So I needed ultimately to do more Jewish ancestral healing post-seminary to get to the place where and also build friendships with Palestinians in the U.S. Before I got to the place where I could say I'm a non-Zionist or an anti-Zionist ultimately. And so I honestly, was not incredibly outspoken about Israel and Zionism until the events of October 7th, and then witnessing the immediate attacks by the Israeli military, and witnessing the action that happened on the Capitol, where many rabbis and activists from JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, traveled and occupied the state capitol, that I had just a deep sense of clarity that I could not be silent anymore, and that my silence would not protect me or anybody else. And furthermore, that the ways in which anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are being conflated in the mainstream narratives are ultimately anti-Semitic and dehumanizing to Jews and separate me from my own values and sense of integrity and self. And so all that to say, it's been a winding journey. I know each person has a really unique journey in their own anti-Zionism journey, and I'm grateful for all of the ways that I feel like other Jews and also Palestinians have held space for me in these moments of learning and discernment. And I'd say that that's ongoing. And yeah, I'm looking forward to having these conversations in a year or two with even greater clarity, honestly.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I can definitely relate to especially specific points along your journey. And of course, everyone's journey is unique.
Absolutely.
But there are commonalities.
Yeah.
I think that many of us share. I didn't come from a mixed family. My family is 100% Jewish. In fact, I did a DNA test last year because I found one that was super on sale and from a company that was, 100% by geneticists, for geneticists. There were no corporate interests involved, and I felt like I could really trust them. And so I found out that my ancestry is, 82% Middle Eastern, 79% of which is Jewish, and the other 3% is Arab. And then the remaining 18% or whatever is, mixed European, like Spanish, Italian, Polish, German, people that we have mixed with, in the diaspora. But, I'm basically all Jew. Certainly all the family history that I have, my mom's family emigrated from Lithuania and Russia. My mother's father was fleeing the Holocaust. My mother's mother came before that, but also fleeing pogroms. My father's side, Russia, Poland, fleeing pogroms early 20th century. So I always had a strong sense of Jewish identity. And as a kid, you go to Hebrew school. Even as a Reformed Jew, we were very modern. My parents were both raised kosher, but they broke away from that as soon as they left for college. I wasn't raised kosher. You go to Reform Hebrew school. Every day, you start Hebrew school by singing Hatikvah, the Israeli national anthem.
Yep.
And, I went to an independent school. I never even sang the American national anthem as a kid. I was not indoctrinated into nationalism in any way, except for at Hebrew school. And it wasn't that heavy-handed, so I sort of just filed it away like, yeah, this is a thing we all do. But again, it's not my home country. My grandparents didn't come from there. No one in my family came from there. My nationality is not Israeli. But when I got to college, I sort of vaguely thought maybe I should take a year abroad in Israel to get to know what is ostensibly my culture better. And so in service of that, Meph knows this part of the story, I actually went on the first Birthright trip. It wasn't even called Birthright the first year because it was just like a test version. And it was out of UMass Amherst. Harold Grinspoon is one of the big funders, as I'm sure you know, Kaya, being out of Western Mass also. And I was taking a modern Hebrew class at UMass because at the time they didn't offer it at Smith. And so because of that, I got to hear about this. We're doing this test trip. It's not being widely advertised, but if you're taking modern Hebrew at UMass, you're eligible to go. So I went on this trip, and it wasn't fully formed. They didn't have the big concert at the end. But because I had grown up at this independent school that was very hippy-dippy, the propaganda on this trip was so clear to me. They took us to dinner at army bases. They took us to a museum that was just all about the 1967 borders and why we couldn't possibly give up an inch. It was all I was so aware of this hand on the back of my neck showing me this is what we want you to see on this trip. It's like, okay, if you want me to experience a country, can you please let me have my own experience? And I am strongly anti-war in my own country. I don't know what makes you think I would want to make chums on an army base in any other country that I visit. So it turned me off a lot. And I didn't feel welcome in Israel. So many young Jews who were just blindly, virulently, unapologetically pro-Israel without any subtlety or without any question of human rights, talk a lot about going to Israel is like going home. It's this magical feeling. They've never felt anything like it. You're among your own people. You feel so safe. I never felt that in Israel for a second. Maybe it's because, as a young person myself, I had pink hair. I had a lip ring. I didn't blend in. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like I was among people who loved me and wanted me. Every day I was reminded, make sure you wear a long skirt, make sure you're covered up or you're going to get stoned. And of course, in Tel Aviv, there's places that it's definitely not true. But in the Old City, in Jerusalem, in Sfat, in a lot of these old religious communities, I was not safe as I was naturally. I had to dress in religious drag. So I never had that strong sense of coming home that many American Jews talk about when they go on birthright or, when they're not in resistance to the indoctrination. I never had that feeling. So I went on birthright. It turned me off a bit. And when I got back, I started to ask some of the questions that you're talking about. I'm sure many Jewish listeners have heard this. When we grew up in Hebrew school, we're taught one of the first things they tell you about Israel, the foundation of Israel, is that it's a land without a people for a people without a land. This founding mythology that we're all given about Israel is that it was this empty place yearning for its people to come home. Like there was no one there. It was just empty. So, as a college student, obviously, I started to dig into this. I was like, well, obviously, we all know that's not true. There were people. There were 750,000 Palestinian people forced from their homes at gunpoint in the founding of Israel. And, most of them ended up in Gaza. Some of them are still in the West Bank. 800,000 olive trees were bulldozed. Water sources were filled with cement. All of this was in the name, of Israeli control of this land. These are not secret facts. You can look up Project Dalet. For people who don't know, Dalet is just the Hebrew letter D, so it's like saying Plan D from the inception in 1948 was, the plan to subdue and expel all of the Palestinian people who live there so that we could take over this land. And so the more I learned in college, the more upset I got. And there was one particular quote, and I wrote it down here, from Winston Churchill that I read in college. And this is something that Churchill said to the Peel Commission in 1937. And anyone who wants can Google this. Winston Churchill said, "I do not agree that the dog lying in a manger has the final right to that manger, even though he may have lain there a very long time." And that was in reference to the Palestinians. "I do not admit that right. I do not admit, for instance, that a great wrong has been done to the Red Indians of America or the Black people of Australia. I do not admit that a wrong has been done to these people by the fact that a stronger race, a higher grade race, a more worldly wise race has come in and taken their place." So as soon as I read that, I was like, wait a minute. It would not have happened without the intervention of the Western world. The Balfour Declaration in 1917, basically the UK's intention to support this Zionist project. So it's not like the Jews could have come in on our own and made this happen. And so if you look into the real motivations, it's like, okay, well, why would they? There's so many peoples around the world who have endured genocide and atrocities, and no one's giving them their own theocratic ethno-state. So why us? And you realize there was actually a lot of anti-Semitic motivations from the Western world in creating Israel, because they wanted a place to shove all these Jewish refugees that wasn't in their country.
Exactly. Yeah. And there were other places that were considered that weren't Palestine too.
Yeah. And so the more you think about, like, who's in your corner?
Right.
Is Marjorie Taylor Greene in your corner? Do you want to be on the same team as Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Well, no, Christian Zionists have a totally different...
Right. And so the more I learned, as a young person in college, and it took me a long time to use the word anti-Zionist. And in the same sense that, if you look back on America's history, I mean, Winston Churchill made that comparison. He's like, you didn't do anything wrong to the Indians. Most of us would not agree with that. It's like, okay, but we're here now. America's here. We can't undo it. We have to move forward. And to a degree, I feel the same way about Israel. The people in Israel are there. We have to move forward. We can't put it back in the bottle. But to deny that a wrong was done, to move forward as if there was no wrong done, is crazy. And so I tried to have conversations like that with my Jewish friends and my family. And I found very quickly, from a very young age, that you cannot have these conversations with 95% of the Jewish world. And no matter how calm you are, no matter how factual you are, you know, you say something like, I have concerns about, you know, the way the Israeli military treats Palestinian civilians. There have been laundry lists of chronicled human rights abuses, and the same way that I don't want to be represented by an American military that does human rights abuses, the Israeli military also claims to represent me. I don't want any military that claims to represent me doing human rights abuses. People just freak out and say, you know, you're a self-hating anti-Semite, you're a terrorist, you're brainwashed. No matter how many sources you cite for facts, they say it's all propaganda, it's all not true, it's fake news. You know, you're brainwashed, you're wrong, you're crazy, and they're screaming at you. And there is no conversation to be had.
For us, don't you want a place where we are safe? Yeah.
Even I remember when I was 19, the conversation came up. I would never bring up this conversation with my grandparents on purpose, but somehow the conversation came up at the dinner table, and I had to say I don't agree with a lot of these decisions that Israel has made. And my grandma started screaming at me, and she said, so if someone comes in and starts hitting you on the head with a big stick, I should just let them? And I said, Grandma, nobody's hitting me on the head with a stick. Like, you know, all of the ways in which the Holocaust has been weaponized, for example, you know, that shit is over. These people had nothing to do with the Holocaust. These people are not in power, and they never have been.
But also you look at how the Israeli government has treated Holocaust survivors as well. And it is
historically
horrible,
not great.
Historically terrible.
Yeah, I mean, Hannah Arendt in 1948, I believe, compared the newly formed Israeli army to the Nazi Party for the way that they were invading and abusing Arab villages. But, you know, nobody talks about that. So, you know, over time, so this is, you know, a 20-year journey for me. I got very discouraged about the possibility of having these conversations in the Jewish world unless you're in a community that already is open to it, which, you know, good luck with that. There are some to be had. And of course, nowadays, you know, JVP's numbers have exploded since October 7th, which is very encouraging. But in general, you know, people who don't want to hear it, they're not willing to sit down and say, let's talk about it. Let's try and see if we can see each other's point of view. That does not happen. There's these gut level trauma responses where if you're not on my side, then you're a terrorist, you're out to get me, you're a self-hating anti-Semite, and you've clearly been brainwashed. And there's no room for discussion. And there's two other authors that I wanted to mention that I read in college that influenced my thinking. And they're very accessible. The first was a book by Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman, written in 1988, called Manufacturing Consent. And I recommend this to everyone who is trying to get a handle on the news media. And it surprisingly still holds up, even though it was written in 1988. They talk about 5 filters on news media, one of which at the time was communism. But you can just sub in terrorism for communism, and it still works 100% with terrorism, of course, just being a sub-in for Islamophobia. So I'm going to read you a short quote from Manufacturing Consent, subbing in the word terrorist for communist. It should be noted that when anti-terrorist fervor is aroused, the demand for serious evidence in support of claims of terrorist abuses is suspended. Issues tend to be framed in terms of a dichotomized world of terrorist and anti-terrorist powers, with gains and losses allocated to contesting sides and rooting for our side considered an entirely legitimate news practice. And then the second book that I read around the same time was Edward Said's Covering Islam.
Hey, by the way, folks, we've talked about Said before.
Yes, we have, but I haven't specifically talked about this book and this aspect of his work. So this book was written in 1981, but I read the 1996 updated version, where he just generally... So this is about Islamophobia more broadly, and about how important it is to Western interests to have this vague, scary other to project all of our fears onto, especially at the end of the Cold War, when we no longer had Russia and communism as that big, scary other. We just slotted in Islam and Islamophobia very neatly. And so in that newly updated 1996 version that I read, there was a headline, and I'm going to link this into the show notes because it's still available digitally, from the New York Times. Literally, it said, "The Red Menace is gone, but here's Islam." From January 21st, 1996, New York Times.
Gotta love the New York Times. Always on the pulse of the, being terrible.
Yeah, so of course it's just a pure coincidence how this ubiquitous enemy that we always have to be at war with, is in a part of the world that is rich with oil and resources that, we don't really want. It's just a coincidence. It's just a coincidence. Yeah. And I'll give you one last quote from Arthur Balfour, and then I'll hand it over to you, Meth. This is a quote from an article in the Jewish Daily Forward from November 1st, 2017, about Arthur Balfour and his white supremacy and anti-Semitism in his role in the formation of the Zionist state in light of these facts. He wrote... This is a quote from Arthur Balfour that he wrote in his introduction to a book on the history of Zionism. He wrote in 1919 that the Zionist movement would mitigate the age-long miseries created for Western civilization by the presence in its midst of a body which it too long regarded as alien and even hostile, but which it was equally unable to expel or absorb. He's like, this is the perfect solution. We have a place to send them. So, the more I learn about these things, and that's, even before you get into the question of what are the living conditions of the Palestinian people in Israel who are in a cage, at least in Gaza. Gaza is a city-sized cage. They cannot leave. And the Israeli government and military controls every aspect of their lives. There's over 300 checkpoints. 97% of the water is undrinkable. It's illegal for them to even collect rainwater. What are they supposed to do? There's a wonderful documentary that I hope will still be available by the time we post this called Israelism that you may have seen, Kaya, that follows the founder of If Not Now. And so there was, I think it's from that. It might have been from another documentary. They were interviewing an Arab and Israeli, two men, an Arab and an Israeli, who were co-founders of a peace organization in Israel and Palestine. And they both had lost children to violence. And so this old Israeli man who had lost his daughter to violence, he says, you can't put 2 million people in a box and close the lid and expect nothing to happen. So all the demonization that happens in Jewish culture about, Palestinians are uncivilized, all this rhetoric from Netanyahu, they're just inherently vicious, they just hate us, for no reason. We didn't do anything to cause it. We just put them in a box and closed the lid and took away all their food and water. Other than that, we didn't do anything to cause it. Yeah, so,
we are eternally the victims.
Right, exactly. Nothing we do could change the fact that we are occupying the victim role in this equation.
Right.
So over time, I became more and more against the side that I'm supposed to be for. And, it just doesn't make sense. Like, Judaism is not a nationality. I'm not from Israel. My family's not from Israel. The fact that, our ancient ancestors from 2,000 years ago are from there is not relevant. And eventually I also started to get mad. I have a sense of resentment and anger at the Zionist movement for taking away my real history and my real culture, which is, the Jewish diaspora culture of the world that's been our culture for 2,000 years. The culture of Doikait, which is the Yiddish word for here-ness.
Yes.
Which has described the culture that we have thrived in for 2,000 years. And there's so much beauty and richness to that history that we don't get to study because all the cultural study times in Hebrew school and Jewish education gets devoted to Israel, which is, a construction of the 20th century.
Well, technically it's the construction of the 19th century, but
yes, you're right. The 19th and 20th century.
yeah, late 19th century.
Yes. A modernity. You could say it's a modern construction.
Modernity. The birth of nationalism fit very nicely into the understanding of an ethno-nationalist state for Jews, which fits which fits with, the what's the dude's name? Theodore, what the heck's his name?
Herzl.
Theodore Herzl. Theodore Herzl, who was the founder of political Zionism. And
you're right. He was a 19th century thinker.
Yeah, he was a 19th century thinker who essentially thought that, like, because Jews were persecuted, he was a European Jew. This is a very important understanding. He was a Jew in the European diaspora. And because Jews were, there was this line of, there was partial assimilation, but a lot of anti-Semitism. Jews would only be safe if they had their own ethnic national state, just like other European countries had, because that was the context in which he lived and understood. Because he was living in, and of course, that was, he came up with the main theories in 1897, the height of the Victorian era, the height of settler colonialism.
Exactly.
So
and the early Zionists called themselves colonizers and settlers openly and happily so. Those words weren't considered dirty words at the time.
No, they weren't. They were, because it was very much we are coming together. It was about the strength of the Jews.
Right. And we've now erased, 2,000 years of diaspora culture as if it's not relevant, as if it's not precious and beautiful.
And there was, in history, especially, even amongst European and, American Jews, because at this point there was a large culture of American Jews, and the American Jewish culture was really starting to kind of gel together as its own very significant kind of expression of the diaspora. The socialist Bundists were very anti-Zionist.
I mean, the Yiddish labor movement.
The Yiddish labor movement were very anti-Zionist. And they were like my idols growing up. Like,
amen to that. Yeah. So Meph, tell us about your journey.
So my journey is complicated because I've always had very complicated feelings because of what I just talked about. I'm a nerd that loves history. And so I've always kind of tried to understand the historical context of the drive of why would European Jews want this? So I understood why European Jews would want this. But like I just said, they're coming from a nasty context of it. And that was also like Jenny and Kaya's experience. I'm an American Jew that was indoctrinated with this is what we have. Kaya, your experience in living in a multi-faith household is close to mine as well. My father was not Jewish and my mother was. But I spent most of my kind of faith tract with my mother's family. So so I had this like half Jewish, like it was literally half Jewish, like half of the time I was like in a spiritual space and a religious space. It was with my Jewish family, but I didn't learn enough. Like I didn't go to Hebrew school. It was just kind of like, oh, I was a Passover Jew. Right. Like, so I go for all the holidays. But even then we would go and, we would talk about next year in Israel and, my brother would get IDF t-shirts and, we talk about how tough the masculinization of Israel, to show my brother that Jews could be tough. Right. So there's a thing trying to sell that to my brother.
Israeli machismo is huge.
Also, friggin' Krav Maga. Why are we teaching Krav Maga? I have a major issue with this. Anyway, as somebody that is currently studying martial arts, I have major shade about Krav Maga. But whatever. So I kind of went through this and heard, the constant we are, and the perpetual stories of the Holocaust and the years of victimhood and all of this stuff. But also, like, I was exposed to personal anti-Semitism as a kid. So I was also like, you know, I was pushed and called a dirty Jew before. I was like, wow, it would be really cool if I went to a place where this didn't happen. So there were like parts of my life where I was like, hey, that sounds really cool. But then I turned 13 and became an anarchist and started looking into like, wait a minute, the idea of a nation is bullshit anyway. And then really started looking into Yiddish labor movements and the socialist bundists and looking into all of these, Emma Goldman, like idol, right? Like in all of these fantastic people that I looked up to in history were giving me these like, wait, you can be strong and you can be a Jew and you can be strong in your own diaspora. And you don't need this nation. You don't need an ethno-state. Nations are poison. I was like, okay.
Right. So are you saying that the solution to the problems of nationalism is not more nationalism?
Exactly. And so I was like, oh, okay, fine, sure. So, and then I just, you know, stopped talking about it. Or whenever somebody tried to talk to me about Israel, I would say, you know, yeah, fuck Israel. But then with my family, I would say, well, I understand that it's a complicated thing to talk about because I didn't want to bring it up with them, right? And it is a complicated topic because nothing is ever cut and dry. But like, I'm never, ever going to say that this is not complicated because it is, because history is complicated. But at the end of the day, what like the philosophy of Zionism is not the philosophy that I feel will be the one that Jews need to keep our like lives and culture alive and our spiritual selves fulfilled to move forward, because it's a dead end in our evolution and we are an ever evolving people. Like, that's what we do. So
yeah, if there's one message that I could get across to people, and it's a simple one, but it's never made any headway, is that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are two totally unrelated things. And, you know, and this is not a new concept, you know, the fact that people, and this is, you know, predates October 7th, over the last several years, people say, oh, anti-Semitism is on the rise, anti-Semitism has increased by 400%. It's like, we have no way of knowing how true that is, because all the major organizations that track these things, like the ADL, which is the Anti-Defamation League, it's the Jewish Anti-Defamation League, even though it's not in their title, they count any criticism of Israel as an instance of anti-Semitism.
Which, and I do want to point something out.
Many of those are from Jewish people.
Many of those are from Jewish people. And I do want to point something out, because I have noticed this, because I am terminally online, is that there are instances where people have used coded, like, Zionist as code for Jews.
Of course.
And have used there are white supremacists. Jackson Hinkle's a great example. He's a white supremacist. His whole thing before the Israel-Palestine thing was he was a MAGA communist. He's this extreme white supremacist piece of shit who, the second October 2nd happened, was able to pivoted his entire internet, presence from whatever, right-wing populist fascist thing he was doing into being pro-Palestinian, which was not. It was anti-Semitism that was, with the veneer of pro-Palestine. And that is happening. And so it's hard to shake this out because of all of the smoke screen. Like the smoke screen of criticizing Israel, saying, hey, I think this is bad, is not anti-Semitism. Whereas saying, like, it's because the Zionists run the banks, and that's why nobody is able to, say anything bad about the Jews. Like,
I mean, that's a very extremist example. And of course, like, white supremacists like that, like, crazies on the fringes, like this guy, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, are always going to find a way to say the most extreme things that defy logic.
Sure.
But aside from that, there are just so many Jewish people who can't say anything, who have been put on blacklists.
Oh, absolutely.
And they can't say anything. Again, this is the same thing as the McCarthy era. As American citizens, we can't criticize our own government. And I have said this to so many people in so many different contexts where I'm saying it's very dangerous to conflate criticism of a government with being anti-Semitic, because being anti-Semitic is prejudice and hatred based on your identity category versus criticism of Israel. It's a country with a government and an army and governmental policies that we need to be able to criticize.
Absolutely.
So when I say that, I have literally never once gotten an actual response from any Jewish person that I've said this to. I say this, and the response, unless I'm talking to someone who already agrees with me, I say this to a Jewish person, and the response, again, is you're sick, you're brainwashed, you're a self-hating anti-Semite, something else disgusting like that, but they don't actually answer me or give me a factual reason why they disagree with me. I've never once had anyone push me back with an actual answer about why they disagree, why they don't think that is true, what I have just said. Not once in 20 years of me saying this.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree. And what I'm saying is, this is the smokescreen that is happening, where when these types of things that are anti-Semitic are happening, and they're happening on the right and on the left, because there is anti-Semitism on the left. There is hatred on the left, same way there's sexism on the left, and there's racism on the left, and there's homophobia on the left, the same way that all of these things happen in, regardless of the political spectrum. These groups, these mainstream groups that are also on the right and on the left, that are conflating these conversations of, I don't think this is really good that Israel is doing this, that's anti-Semitic, are making the conversation muddy. There is nasty stuff that is happening. And it's muddying the waters. And it's muddying the waters so people can't, the real nasties can come out and do the real nasty things. And that's the problem. That's one of the big problems in terms of, dealing with the rise in anti-Semitism, is that there can be a rise in anti-Semitism because the waters are muddied.
Yeah.
And it's messed up. And I've seen it. I have seen it happen. And I've seen very well-meaning people say stuff like, well, it's because Jews do this, right? And I'm like, no, whoa, hold on a second. No, this is not about Jews. And they're like, no, of course it's not. It's, it's about Israel. I'm talking about Israel. I'm like, no, you're actually just using this to get out of what you're saying.
Right. Well, but this is what I'm saying. Israel so ardently wants to say that there is no distinction between Israel and the Jewish people. They're making it worse.
Yes.
They are propagating anti-Semitism by insisting that they represent the entire Jewish people.
Right.
So if you have any beef with Israel, you have beef with the entire Jewish people.
I completely agree. And that's totally what I'm saying. Kaya, I saw that you were kind of nodding along with that. I was wondering if you had something to add.
Yeah, y'all are getting me thinking about so many different dimensions of this. But one thing that I've sat with for years is how I think that within social justice communities and liberal communities, sometimes talking, there's more language to be able to talk about Israel-Palestine than there is to be able to talk about anti-Semitism. People don't know what anti-Semitism is, actually. I think that it breaks through some of the dichotomies that exist just within our discourse, especially in the U.S. There's such a deep history of racism along the lines of color that I think anti-Semitism and discrimination based on an ethnic category that is not related to skin color is something that there just doesn't tend to be a lot of space held for in the conversation. And so I think that sometimes that it's a gap and a silence that further enables this conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism And yeah, so to me, the way anti-Semitism shows up on the left is like an inability to talk about it, a lack of skill to identify it when it happens, and then this is being used by the right to twist the narrative in a really bad way, and not just the right, also some who are ostensibly on the left. But I would say that I think that the politics have gone so far right in the U.S. It's hard to even know what we mean when we use these terms anymore, because we're living in authoritarian times.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
I also agree with that. I think that's a really sharp observation, is that at what point, can we actually talk about right or left, because we're kind of existing in a Nazi soup.
Yeah, because what is the center anymore, even? Because the politics have skewed so far right. Yeah.
Yeah, and also that really just got me thinking about right anti-Semitism versus right pro-Zionism, because a lot of that comes from Christian nationalism, and Christian Zionism is its own beast, because
we're just a pawn in their narrative.
Right, exactly. Kaya, do you have I think you mentioned that you went to div school, and you have a little bit maybe more of a conversation to a Christ-based spiritualities, and maybe Jenny or I have. Do you have some more information, or could speak to Christian Zionism with a little bit more information than perhaps I can? Or
I can try. I went to a Quaker divinity school.
Great.
And
Quakers.
I'm from Rhode Island. I love Quakers too.
Amazing. Yeah. So I went in with the understanding that there was going to be more space for me as somebody who's not a Christ-centered or Christian-identified person. And in some ways that was true. And in some ways we were very much referring back to the quote Bible for every answer. And anyway, in terms of Christian Zionism, one statistic it's not an exact statistic, but I heard the number of Christian Zionists in the U.S. is greater than the number of Jews across the spectrum of political leanings.
I believe that easily.
I believe that too.
And so I think that American Jews have a tremendous amount of power in this current situation to be advocating for Palestinian liberation. And I think that sometimes just in the mainstream narrative, we forget that Christian Zionism is such a beast, it holds so much power, and is influencing so many people in orienting towards what's happening, and in continuing to support far-right extremist governments and policies and the war machine. So yes, I think that we need to always have Christian Zionism be a part of the narrative when we're talking about Zionism as a whole. And with that said, I did not focus my studies on Christian Zionism by any means.
Why would you?
Yeah.
But it's something that you are aware of. And I think a lot of people who aren't in it have no reason to even be aware of it, to be aware that it's a factor in this whole soup of mishigas.
Right, because when we're thinking about who's funding, who's doing the lobbying on politicians in Washington right now, we know about AIPAC. AIPAC is a huge powerhouse and has so much influence and weight at this time. And there are plenty of Christian Zionist influencers right now who are also lobbying. And so on the level of financial institutions, Zionism holds a lot of power within the U.S. right now.
That's right. And AIPAC has pledged to de-seat basically all the BIPOC members of Congress because they have dared to advocate for the human rights of the people of Palestine and, label them as dangerous anti-Semites. And not see the irony that there's 5 or 6 BIPOC members of Congress and you have this massive right-wing organization with millions, hundreds of millions of dollars vowing to take them down and seeing themselves as righteous in that.
Yeah, I mean, they're terrible. I mean, they've always been terrible.
They are terrible.
Well, and I think that with the ways that the narrative of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, that getting conflated within the mainstream media, that's the cultural narrative basically being a cover for what's happening behind the scenes, which is this financial backing of political extremism, right? And so there's this way that the cultural, the financial, and the political right now are all kind of in cahoots to enable a genocide in Gaza.
Yeah.
I mean, I recently was listening to an episode of On the Media, which I will also link to in our show notes, that said that 35 U.S. states have now legally adopted the definition of anti-Semitism to include anything against Zionism or Israel.
That's awful. But
it's not necessarily enforceable, but it is a legal definition.
Yeah. One of the things that, sorry.
No. I was just going to be a little snarky and be like, I'm wondering how many of these states actually have Jews in them. Because so many states, like the Jewish population in America, like, is not large, right? And
no, it's 2%.
Yeah.
And it's higher now than it's ever been before.
And so many of these states are probably like Christian Zionist states.
Yeah,
so,
and ostensibly this is all to protect us.
Right, exactly. Right. Meh.
So I just wanted to name one of the things that we've been talking about at Jewish Voice for Peace is how important it is to expose the right-wing extremist political affiliations of these prominent cultural groups that are saying they're defending Jews, they're defending our human rights, our whatever story that they're appropriating of anti-Semitism to do the dirty work, that we need to be, as activists, as organizers, as cultural workers, whatever your listeners identify as, that there's this real power in exposing the underlying right-wing extremist intentions, because I think a lot of people are genuinely confused because of the ways that these cultural narratives are getting twisted in propaganda.
Yeah, and that's by design for sure.
And to combine that with the trauma that so many people in Jewish communities are carrying and then projecting onto the situation at the same time. And so then there are American Jews, as you named, Jenny, who can't see what's happening in Israel-Palestine in relation to right-wing extremist politics, that there's a gap in that conversation, or there's a way that kind of exposure of the underlying financial and political situation hasn't really been unpacked within a lot of prominent Jewish institutions, nonprofits, synagogues, that I think further than kind of enables this narrative by Christian Zionists to perpetuate and have as much power as it does. And so, yeah, I think it's important to just identify that there are many actors in this situation. And I think there's a lot of power both within Jewish institutions and American Jewish communities to be holding space for conversations and dialogue and learning, and also to be drawing attention to who really has a lot of power in this situation, and exposing the brutal facts for what they are.
Yeah, and just pulling back that veil.
Yes, definitely.
To see, all of these creepy right-wing extremists who are operating in the dark and don't want us to see them in the light of day.
I learned that the billionaire that wrote the theme song for Inspector Gadget is funding a bunch of nasty happenings over in Israel.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I know. He's also the guy behind Power Rangers.
Bummer.
I know. These are my factoids. Like, hey, your childhood is ruined.
Yeah. And like, people who think that it doesn't relate to us, it's not relevant to our lives here in America, particularly maybe if you're not Jewish. I'm sure you guys probably both know about this, the Gilley Police Exchange, the Georgia-Israel Law Enforcement Exchange.
Oh, yeah. Cop City.
Yeah, Cop City in Atlanta. It's like, let's help us, it's help us train each other's police and military to be more brutal with our respective people of color.
Yeah, it happens with other cities too.
Yeah, but it's named after Georgia, and it's primarily started in Atlanta. But I'm not surprised to hear that they have branched out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can look it up online. You can read all about it. And they specifically share tactics on, profiling BIPOC populations in neighborhoods and how to be more brutal, and just really great stuff that's going to put you right to sleep at night. So it is relevant to our lives, however you slice it.
So, speaking of our childhoods, I think it might be time to kind of tie our conversation into She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. What do you think, Jenny?
I think that's a smashing idea for us, Captain Meth.
Oh, fantastic, Princess Jenny. So, Jenny, you said you had some ideas, and I like to hear them because I like listening to you.
This is something that I actually thought about on my very first viewing of the very first episode when I saw that princess propaganda poster on Adora's punching bag. Kaya, I wonder if that's something that caught your attention. In the opening scene, we see our hero protagonist wholesomely preparing for her day, punching on a punching bag, getting ready to face the enemy, being the princesses, and there's this poster of this evil, scary princess with a vicious grin and the big grasping claws towering over a group of terrified looking horde soldiers that are just begging for mercy. And you can tell right away that this is a propaganda poster, and it's all relative. How are you, who's framing this situation, and how do they want you to see it? Is that something that you picked up on?
I didn't notice that, but now that you mention it, I'm like, I need to watch that again. And that absolutely resonates with my other observations and the themes that I thought really resonated with this conversation.
Yeah, because, it reminds me so much of, and I can't claim to be an expert on Israeli culture, but I have had two roommates who I lived with for 3 years each, who are both from Israel, and I have cousins in Israel. So I have some grounding in Israeli culture. And in terms of their media exposure, their lives are just very much in a bubble. The media that they see is very different from the media that we see. They're just trained from birth to hate Palestinians, and to, in the same way that Adora and her fellow Horde cadets are trained, because they are told that, these people are violent, vicious instigators, and if you see one, they're going to try to kill you, and you have to kill them first, and that is self-defense. Being wired to think that it is self-defense to attack before you can be attacked, and just have it be so drilled into you from childhood. That was a very clear parallel to me.
Yeah, I think that's also very interesting, because there are, this whole, they're monsters, right? Like, even though these people, the Horde, are the invaders in the land, they are the monsters. The princesses are the monsters, the people that are fighting for their liberation, the people that, are literally fighting. They're called the rebellion. They're literally fighting for the liberation of their own land, are seen as the monsters in their own land. And I find that's very, yeah. That's very yes, Jenny.
It's very yes. And then, they go into their little training simulation, and the big blue trainer dude tells them that their mission is to liberate Bright Moon in Lord Hordak's name. And that, immediately reminded me of even, like well-intentioned, ostensibly liberal mainstream Israeli people like my cousin in Israel, who for the first 3 weeks, after October 7th, every Shabbat, we always text to say Good Shabbos. And every Shabbat, he just would say, Good Shabbos, praying for our soldiers, Am Yisrael Chai, which means the nation of Israel lives, and, tons of Israeli flags and hearts. And I didn't know what to say back because we're not super close. We've never met in person. He's from my South African branch of the family. And I didn't want to start something that was going to blow up and ruin our relationship.
Right.
But eventually, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I said, I hope that you're also davening for the innocence of Gaza. And if that's too much for you, I hope you're at least davening for the innocent children of Gaza. And he wrote back, of course, we have to liberate Gaza from Hamas.
Right, which is the...
Not from the people who are bombing them.
Well, because that's the liberal right, so byline. That's the liberal byline, is that, of course, the children need to be liberated from these evil people that have taken over and have made, they've corrupted, right? Like, the rebellion is the corrupted. They are the corruption, right? Because these people are children, and they, are therefore unable to fight for themselves. And so that's also like a reality and
the idea of like, who are you, like, who's being liberated from who?
Right. And like a violent act, into like a violent terrorist act, it's horrible. I don't think it's unfair to say that what happened on October 7th was terrible.
Of course.
Everybody involved.
Of course.
A violent act is not
something to be celebrated.
Not something to be celebrated, but it is something to be intellectually understood.
It's not something that bombing tens of thousands of people,
and I mean,
half of whom are children, into the rubble is going to make better.
The response, no, right? Like, no, but also like, the idea of like liberating them from Hamas, like, okay, so bombing children is going to liberate from Hamas. Also, like, a liberatory violent group is a reality of this sort of continued violence. And so this rhetoric of liberating from Hamas is a very like loaded part of a conversation as well.
It's a question of who are the liberators and who are the conquerors.
Who are the liberators and who are the conquerors? And that's putting the onus of like, these evil bad people did this evil bad thing, right? And it's like, yeah, but there's a whole lot of evil bad people doing a lot of evil bad things, and you guys are actually really evil bad people doing, so it's so yeah.
So the next major bullet I had in episode 1 was when Adora has been captured by Bo and Glimmer, and they're walking through the woods, and Adora says to Bo, she's a princess, you can't trust her.
Oh, yeah.
Princesses are a dangerous threat to everyone on Etheria. I thought that was just common knowledge. They're violent instigators who don't even know how to control their own powers. And Bo is looking at her like, where are you getting this from? Like, you've never even met a princess, have you? Because this is all propaganda that you're spouting. This is not based on anything real. This is based on a social construction that has been deliberately, poured into you by your superiors for a reason. It's not based on socialization. It's not based on having known people.
Right. Yeah, it's pure.
It's a very obvious parallel.
It's pure propaganda. The Horde isn't an ethno-state, though, right? Like, it's...
No, it's not. I mean, it's not a perfect parallel, obviously, because... because it's not.
I think a closer parallel for settler colonialism, which we don't see in these first 3 episodes, but we see later, is the first ones, who are of...
Yes.
Who we understand them to be of
space colonizers
and of a similar ethnic group, right? Like, they are...
Yes, the Horde absorbs everyone they conquer, so it's not a perfect parallel.
They're more like
Romans.
us. Or Romans.
They're more like us.
Yeah, they're
like
us.
the United States.
Yeah. So there's like,
I mean, we are the closest thing to a modern equivalent of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, it's like a cultural imperialism type of like absorption and, you know, that sort of thing. Whereas the first ones are closer to a settler colonialism type of model that we would be using for this. Also, like the British Empire.
Yes.
I was really interested in not only the clear propaganda, right, that we see projected onto to Glimmer and princesses in general, but also the way that Adora identifies as like innocent, like she's so shocked that Glimmer is afraid of her and the Horde, and she's like, oh, me? What? How? Oh, no way! That's not possible. You're afraid of me? Like, I didn't do anything. I would never hurt a fly. Right? So it's just like that level of shock that she's so internalized her own socialization that like she can't recognize her own capacity to harm or the collective capacity to harm. Like it's a literal like another reality for her that's even possible, and that really struck me.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's a huge parallel to and a callback to what we were talking about before, which is like the victim idea of like, hi, I'm not harming you first, we're protecting us, like we are the victim. Understanding of like we're just protecting. You know,
that's a good one. That's
I am innocent. And also like Adora as like the beautiful blonde soldier. And you watch some of the like propaganda videos on TikTok of these Israeli soldiers, these Israeli women soldiers who like look like Aryan, like beauty queens. And like, it's so weird.
Yeah. And I mean, that was definitely something that was socially constructed intentionally, you know, to build up, you know, in the early days of the Israeli state, you know, the beautiful athletic ideal of the young, strong IDF soldier.
Yeah. And the co-ed soldiers too, right? Like everyone here is and the fact that everyone is a soldier.
Yeah.
Right, you know?
Yeah.
Like, just like in the Horde.
My roommate, Jonah, he's not my roommate anymore, obviously. He was my roommate for like 4 years before I moved out of Brooklyn. And we were very good friends. And he grew up modern Orthodox in Israel. And he is now what they call off the derech, which is the equivalent of like recovering Catholic when you're off the path is what it means. So he's not religious anymore. But he told me that, you know, anyone who opts for instead of going into the military at 18, I'm going to do some other type of community service, is seen as super wimpy and lame and very much judged for it. Whereas I had always thought that it was, you know, a socially neutral kind of move to make. Like I know that that's what I would do. I wouldn't want to go to war. And there are all kinds of programs that are like AmeriCorps type programs that you can do if you don't want to serve in the military. But he said it's very, very fringe and very, very looked down on. Unless you're, you know, hyper Orthodox and you're in yeshiva, which is a totally separate category, then you're exempted. But it's very much looked down on to not want to be a soldier.
Right. And it's the same thing with the Horde. There is no way that you can't be a soldier. If you grow up in the Horde, you are a soldier. If you grow up in Israel, you are a soldier.
This is the culture.
This is the culture. You learn Krav Maga.
Yeah. And I know we need to wrap up, but there was one more big bullet that I wanted to hit in episode 2, the attack on Thamor.
Yes.
The understanding that Adora has of it versus the understanding that Catra has of it. When Adora realizes, you know, they were told that this was an insurgent hideout, but she realizes that was a mistake. It's just an innocent village full of unarmed villagers. And so when these tanks roll in and start attacking, she's like, oh no, I have to stop it. And she really believes that if she communicates this misunderstanding to her fellow Horde soldiers, that they'll be like, oh, sorry, our bad, innocent villagers, we'll leave you alone.
Right.
And she goes and tells Catra this, and Catra just does not care.
Right.
And Dora says, these are innocent villagers. I can almost hear Faith's voice responding, no such animal.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And again, this is like Netanyahu's rhetoric. There are no innocent civilians in Gaza. There is no such thing as an innocent Palestinian village. Right. Every target is a fair target. Hospitals are fair targets. Schools are fair targets. They're all secretly full of insurgents.
Right.
There is no such thing as an innocent Palestinian in the eyes of the IDF, in the eyes of the Israeli government.
Yeah.
And that mentality really does filter down into the culture at large.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It filters into American culture as well.
Yes.
I was just at a standout in Greenfield last week, and we had a number of counter protesters or counter people who came with a disruptive intention. And one of those people said that for every Palestinian, for every person in Hamas, like there are 10 Palestinians behind them who support them. And that was his justification for the continuation of this genocide. And so I think that logic has made its way across and through the mainstream media.
Versus the unassailable innocence that we assign to Israeli civilians.
Right, and American civilians.
And American civilians. Their innocence is beyond reproach.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
That's probably as good a note as any to end on. Unless, Kaya, do you have any final thoughts either on the show or any final thoughts that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I'll also just name that one of the things that struck me was the trust that starts to develop between Adora and Glimmer. How at first Glimmer is like very suspicious. And then at a certain point, like after she's witnessed Adora like watching a horse and like recognizing the beauty of that horse, like something shifts for her. And the next time that they're in a conflict with an external force, like she chooses to trust. And that was just a really interesting moment that left me just sitting with this question of what is it that enables us to build trust after once we have these internalized ideas of the other. And in that case, it was this shared moment of beauty and witnessing.
And maybe just respecting the sanctity of life.
Yeah, and horsies.
Maybe
it's just horsies. Thank you, Kaya. Thank you. That was awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us. Kaya, do you want to tell our listeners where they can find you on the internet, on social media, anywhere that you want to be followed?
Sure. On Instagram, I'm Kaya Dandelion, and you can find me any Saturday at the Greenfield Standout. That's how to find me.
Awesome. And JVP Western Mass or JVP nationally, anywhere you can find JVP.
That's right. We're on Instagram and also on Facebook for our Western Mass chapter.
JVP.org.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, folks, if you liked what you heard, you can like and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast fix. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at HeyAdoraCast, or you can email us at heyadoracast@gmail.com. You can find us on Patreon and get fantastic perks. You can join the conversation on our Discord. We have fantastic conversations on our Discord. We will absolutely continue to speak about this on our Discord. We also have exclusive playlists, Patreon-only live watches and video hangouts, and so many more things. You can find the link to our Patreon and anything else you need to find in our show notes or at heyadora.gay.
You're never going to forget all of our shit. It's at heyadora.gay.
It's all at heyadora.gay. And remember, queer joy is radical.
And queer love saves the universe. Ow!
Thank you.